Welcome to Talk+Water, the podcast associated with the Texas Water newsletter, which provides timely information on the spectrum of Texas water issues, including science, policy, and law. Texas+Water is published jointly by the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, the Texas Water Journal, and the Texas Water Resources Institute at Texas A&M University. You can sign up for Texas+Water by visiting texas+water.org/newsletter. My name is Todd Votteler, and I am the Editor-in-Chief of Texas+Water, as well as the Texas Water Journal, and your host for Talk+Water. This is podcast 12. My guest today is Leah Martinsson, who is the Executive Director of the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts. Welcome, Leah, and thank you for being part of Talk+Water.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's start off with the Texas Alliance for Groundwater Districts. Can you tell us about your organization?
Absolutely. So the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are a member organization formed over 30 years ago, back in 1988. Our membership consists of groundwater conservation districts who constitute our voting members. And then we also have a number of organizations and other groundwater professionals that are a part of our organization as associate members.
Okay. And so, what are some of the things that the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts, does? What are the things that you spend most of your time doing?
Absolutely. So TAG is really intended to be and was created with the idea that GCDs in Texas would benefit from having an educational and informational kind of hub to provide resources and support GCDs and also facilitate communication from GCDs to the outside world, to the public. And so we do a lot of educational activities. We have a number of events that we host over the course of the year. We have a couple regular business meetings, not only where we conduct business, but we also provide opportunities to have our members learn about advances in science and technology, in groundwater policy. We provide updates on, legislation and legal matters, and also to provide networking opportunities between our GCD members and the groundwater professionals that work in that same arena. We have technical and leadership trainings that we hold, typically once, maybe twice a year for our members. Sometimes those are in Austin, sometimes not. And in addition to providing those opportunities and serving as a resource for our members, we like to be an informational resource to the public, to state agencies, to the legislature. And so we do engage on legislation. During the legislative session, we'll closely follow legislation that could affect groundwater districts and their operations. And we will then communicate that information to our membership. We have a legislative committee who keeps track of what's going on. We keep them carefully informed, and if it is determined that it makes sense for there to be a unified voice coming from GCDs, the legislative committee would help TAG in taking a position on those issues. So we do that as well. So in addition to working in the educational and informational and legislative realm, we also like to just have information and data. We conduct a lot of surveys of our members so that when we get a call from an agency or a legislator, we can say, yes, 46 of the GCDs do X. We also have on our website, a few years back, we developed, it's called the GCD Index. And so it is a searchable database that has information on a number of different parameters of all of our GCD members. You can go on there, it's interactive, click on a county, on a GMA, and pull up information about GCD boards, their enabling legislation, their rules and regulations, all that sort of thing.
So about 100 districts statewide, and most are members of TAG. I would imagine trying to keep track of all their activities and to be aware of their various positions. That's a lot of work, it sounds like, and I bet a lot of travel. I mean, do you ever get to go out and meet with the districts in their home territories?
So I think we're going to get to this. I have not been with TAG for very long, and that began during the legislative session, so I haven't yet had an opportunity to get too far afield in visiting our districts. You're right. Texas has 100 groundwater conservation districts, and 86 of those are members of TAG. We also have 42 associate members. We do try to kind of keep tabs on what they're doing, but, it's a back and forth, and our members can choose to engage as much as they want to, which is why the survey tool that we use is really helpful. To the extent that they want to share information with us and make it available, then we can provide that back out. We do try to get out and do some trainings in different parts of the state, speak at events around the state, attend GMA meetings where possible. It is a function of time, however, and distance as well, given a small staff that we have.
GMA, groundwater management areas, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And can you just tell us a little bit about what those are?
Sure. So in the Chapter 36, there's a requirement that groundwater conservation districts coordinate on a more regional level. And so there were 16 groundwater management areas created, and then there's a joint planning process that they need to go through. And then that process kind of feeds into the state water planning process as well.
So you've got a conference every year in August that is really a conference that a lot of people go to, and I've heard a lot about it over the years, and you've just gone through your first one as executive director. So I'd like to hear something about your conference, and I guess that's one way you get all your members together, and you've gotten to know them, I'm sure, over the space of that conference, and they get to know each other, and so tell us about the conference.
Absolutely. So yes, you're correct. Our cornerstone. Let that cut out.
Well, someday we'll be able to do that.
TAG's cornerstone event is our Texas Groundwater Summit. This year marked our 8th annual summit. You're correct. It was my first, and it is a 3-day event, and it really is kind of the premier groundwater event in Texas. It's a really exciting, fun, informative event. We have a diverse group of groundwater professionals that come. We discuss science, trends, research, and it provides a fantastic networking opportunity, not only for our members, but for really anyone in the groundwater space. I hope maybe someday we'll see you there, Todd.
It's been a few years since I've been to one, but at one point y'all were having it in San Marcos, and now I understand you moved down to San Antonio.
Yes, that's correct. For the last 2 years, we have been in San Antonio, and it was a really fun event to be at, and I was really happy to be a part of it. We've got some great expert presentations. This year we had panels spanning topics from how GCDs should coordinate with county commissioners and judges, to brackish groundwater surface water interaction. We had a distinguished panel of legislators there. Groundwater data. I mean, we really kind of covered a number of topics. We had a couple of great keynotes. Director Kathleen Jackson from the Development Board came down, and Chancellor John Sharp from the Texas A&M system also came down to provide a keynote, which was really, really fun and kind of different to have that there. So I will mention for your listeners that we do actually record that event, and so our sessions become available online. You can find a YouTube channel to watch those sessions. It's not up quite yet, but I would imagine in a month's time, this year's presentations will be up, and you can find the last couple of years available on TAG's YouTube channel. TAG's YouTube channel.
So how would someone find that who's not, somebody who uses YouTube a lot? Just go into YouTube and enter TAG or Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts in the search.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. So your conference is in San Antonio, and it's after the legislative session, and the legislators are there. I imagine and the chancellor of the A&M. I imagine first of all, there were probably a lot of Aggies who work for groundwater districts, and so that was probably a very popular choice.
I think you're probably right.
And I imagine hearing from the legislators after the session, that was probably a key part of the conference for a lot of the folks who attended.
Absolutely. I think it's always great that we're able to have some of our elected officials come down and talk about where things are in terms of groundwater policy and legislation. And this year's panel followed that same trend. We had both Representative Larson from the House Natural Resources Committee, the chairman of that committee, as well as Senator Perry, chairman of Senate Water and Rural Affairs, on, as well as Representative Tracy King and Representative Navarez, who serve on the House Natural Resources Committee. So we had a really good conversation, not only about what happened in the last session, but where we might see things going.
That's great. That's great. And so you started this position, I guess, right at the beginning. The legislative session was maybe already underway, and now you've gone through your first session and you've hosted your first conference. And so, that's a lot. How did you get up to speed on Texas groundwater issues? And this is a segue for you to tell us about yourself and your background in water.
Sure, absolutely. So, yes, I joined TAG as the executive director just 6 months ago, actually. And not only being new to TAG, I'm new to Texas. Our family relocated to Austin after I'd been in Colorado for almost 20 years. That's where we had been. I am a licensed attorney in Colorado, not in Texas. And I practiced Colorado water rights for really since 2001, when I'd finished law school in Colorado. So coming to Texas, I was excited to work in the water space, but looking for something a little bit different than practicing law day to day. And this opportunity seemed like a really interesting opportunity. Very much a key issue, topic of conversation. So there are a lot of puns I think you could use to talk about how I've been drinking from the fire hose, or I've been treading water, I've been having trial by fire. But really it's, Texas and Texans have been true to their reputation, incredibly open and friendly and helpful and welcoming, without fail. Every person I encounter in, not just, in as TAG members, but also outside of TAG membership at the legislature, could not be more helpful, willing to sit down and provide background, context, the occasional history lesson, their opinions on any number of groundwater issues, which has been great. I've done a lot of listening, a lot of asking questions, and then a lot of going home and doing my homework, reading up on topics. I mentioned the YouTube videos that TAG puts on our channel there. I actually watched some of those before I started, just to kind of get a flavor for some of the issues in the conversations, and that was really useful. But the greatest resource has been the people who've been willing to kind of impart their knowledge and the history to me, because so much of it is contextual.
So you started during the 86th session of the legislature. How long did it take you to kind of get the reins of how the legislature functioned, and which key committees to follow, and I guess maybe there's probably some different ways that people interact with the legislature here in Texas than in other states. Probably every state's a little bit unique about that. Did that process take long to get accustomed to?
You're right about all of that, Todd. I wouldn't say it took long to get used to, though. I mean, figuring out which committees handle water is pretty straightforward, where the bills go and what bills to track, seeing what gets filed and determining whether or not that's going to affect groundwater management. So that isn't so much of a challenge. I think there are a number of informal differences you see between states that took a little bit of getting used to, but I don't think that was a huge learning curve to have to figure out that, oh wow, in Texas, legislative staff there's more of them, and they play a larger role. The staff for the committees play a larger role than in Colorado, for example. But those things didn't take too terribly long to kind of figure out. And like I said, I didn't feel like I'd been thrown to the wolves. Everybody down at the Capitol could not have been more helpful as I did try to kind of get my sea legs.
Well, it's a lot of work in a short period of time. It's probably a good thing that we can only meet at the legislature here in Texas every other year, odd year, and not all year long. Right? So what do you think were some of the most important developments that came out of the 86th session of the legislature with regard to groundwater?
Yeah, so, when it came to the water conversations generally, I think flood really did dominate. Groundwater was a secondary conversation. And I think rightfully so. That was the issue that really needed to be dealt with. And now the development board has the reins in terms of putting together a flood plan. The money is there. And that was the key priority in the water sphere. When it came to groundwater, there were a number of bills that were filed that were significant, but ultimately we did not see a lot of bills passed that changed Chapter 36 in a significant way. There were a few that I'd mentioned. There was Chairman Larson's. It wasn't Chairman Larson's. It was Representative Ashby's House Bill 1066, which dealt with just syncing up the export permits and the operating permits, where districts issue those separately, making sure they kind of get on the same time frame for their renewals. And I don't think that was really a remarkable change to how things are done, but rather a cleanup item, something that had been overlooked a few years back when legislation had been passed. Probably the bill that changed Chapter 36 the most, I would say, was House Bill 722, and that was Chairman Larson's bill that deals with brackish groundwater, and that established some sort of separate permitting rules regarding the withdrawal and production of brackish groundwater from brackish groundwater production zones. So districts would have a different permitting structure for those users of brackish groundwater. And then related to that, we saw Senate Bill 1041, which what that did was it was not such a change to Chapter 36, but it affected brackish groundwater production zones because the development board had only until 2022 to get those identified, and that bill extended that out to 2032. And also we saw the legislature appropriate some funds and some staff to support that work. So that's great that those will get the attention they need to get established, those production zones. The development board can do careful work on those. Not affecting Chapter 36 directly, but there were a few bills that dealt with aquifer storage and recovery and managed aquifer recharge. So House Bill 720 and 721 kind of fell in that sphere. I think those are significant really because they represent this continued focus on what can we do to address the water supply issues that are coming, and trying to think of creative ways to do it. And so 720 created some additional flexibility with surface water appropriations to be used in those kinds of aquifer storage and aquifer recharge projects. And then 721 dealt more with study. Where can we be doing this? Trying to identify places, the development board, where aquifer storage and recovery projects make sense. So I think that was really where you saw kind of the groundwater focus ultimately coming out of the 86. So
you mentioned a number of things about brackish groundwater. What's interesting to me is 15 years ago or so, you mentioned brackish groundwater, and people here would just say, well, that's a problem. It's not a resource for the future. And, of course, there's been a change in how people look at it. They're thinking about, well, at some point in the future, we might want to use that brackish groundwater for something. And so it sounds like the legislation that you referred to kind of reflects that people are seeing that that's a valuable resource for the future. And I imagine that a number of groundwater districts are, in areas where they've got brackish groundwater resources for the future, and they're probably trying to understand more about them.
I would imagine there are a number of districts that are trying to understand those better. There are also a number of districts that already permit into brackish groundwater. And so it's not a resource so much for the future in some areas of the state. It's definitely one that is going to be of continued focus and likely greater development, I think, going forward.
So you're here in Texas, and it's over 100 degrees, and you were in Colorado a year ago where it's probably like 75 degrees right now, or 80 degrees. And you've been here probably long enough to notice some differences between how Colorado manages water and how Texas manages water. Is there anything that kind of, stands out to you that's interesting?
Yeah, that has been a really interesting thing to think about as I've been learning more about how Texas does things in the groundwater sphere and also just in the water sphere generally. So much about how water is managed is a function of history, of geography, of geology, and that is very much true in how Colorado's system developed as well as Texas's system developed. And so I think that's the backdrop where you really see the differences. In Colorado, the water is a more scarce resource than it is in Texas. I think in Colorado, it's something like 15 inches average annual precipitation statewide. In Texas, there are parts of the state that maybe see 16 inches, but those are the driest parts of Texas. And then you have areas that are up in the 30s or beyond. And in Colorado, drought recovery could take years. In Texas, drought recovery can take days
Right.
if there's the right sort of water event. In Colorado, you're talking about a headwater state where all the rivers in Colorado flow out from the mountains, from the Rocky Mountains. And that geography really drives how there's a need to capture the snowmelt when it's coming, use it as much as they can before it leaves the state. So Colorado is very much a prior appropriation state, and that goes for their groundwater as well as for their surface water. The Constitution of Colorado, when Colorado became a state, recognized that the prior appropriation was the way it was going to be. And all along, there's been a recognition that, the groundwater and surface water have some connection. I mean, that dates way back in Colorado. And their true recognition in statute goes back over 50 years to that integration of the majority of groundwater into the surface water system. So they're not talking about groundwater management and surface water management. They just talk about water management, with some exceptions, of course. There are some areas where groundwater is treated differently, and actually not that dissimilarly to how Texas does it, I would say, which is interesting. But so that's such a different starting point. So sure, there are differences. There are also similarities. And when you look at the language of how you talk about reasonableness and beneficial use and injury, these concepts very much exist in Texas surface water. They don't exist as much in groundwater, where in Texas, it all goes back to the rule of capture.
Right. And I also imagine that, while in Texas, we do share rivers with Mexico and Louisiana and Oklahoma and New Mexico, but everything that Colorado has is shared with somebody else, is it not? I mean, you've got every river that starts in those mountains where the headwaters are, you mentioned, it's going off to another state eventually.
That's right.
And that's probably a degree of complication that not every river basin or groundwater district in Texas has to deal with. But for Colorado, it's a constant, I imagine. It
is. And something else that I just mentioned, in Colorado too, because of the tight supply and the need to manage the resource so carefully, they have very tight administration. You have water, you have the state completely divided into water, divisions and then districts with water commissioners who are managing diversion and use of all users all the time. In Texas, there's water masters that exist in some areas of the state, and they're keeping track of these things, but not necessarily at all the time. There's not a requirement of constant measurement and accounting like there is in Colorado, and that's simply because every drop of water event is going to get used multiple times by people in the priority system, and they need to keep track of that. Something else I've noticed, this actually came up the first day I was on the job. I was at a talk where someone was giving a primer on Texas water law, which was somewhat fitting since it was my first day. And the speaker mentioned how there was a 200 acre-foot exemption for ponds in Texas, which initially made my jaw just drop, because in Colorado there is no exemption for ponds like that. There can't be. There's not enough water to have that kind of exemption in the system. And the exemptions you do see are very, very narrow. You have domestic wells that can get permitted in rural areas if you have 35 acres, but you're talking about 25 gallons per minute, a third of an acre foot of water that you can divert from that well over the course of a year. And so the scope of exemptions from administration it varies, and it varies because of the realities of not only history but of climate and geography and geology.
So there are water courts in Colorado. How do they function?
Sure. So yes, and there have been water courts in Colorado for a very long time. The state is divided into 7 water divisions, which match up to the river basins in the state. And then there is one district court within each of those water divisions is appointed sort of the water court. And there is a water judge, and then there's a secondary water judge if necessary. In order to obtain a water right, rather than like in Texas, you go to TCEQ if you're getting a surface water right, or you would go to your GCD if you needed if you were in a groundwater conservation district to get a well permit. In Colorado, you actually file an application with the court to appropriate water, and that would even go if it's groundwater, unless you're in one of these sort of designated areas where it's managed differently. You file that application, and anybody who believes their water right could be injured by your application can participate in that process. And you then enter into what can be a multi-year process of working as the applicant with all of those folks who are not comfortable with your water application to try to come to some resolution. Ultimately, if you're not able to reach that, you're going to a trial. You might have a dozen parties opposed to your application that you're participating in that water court trial. The court would issue its decision, and then it can be appealed directly to the Supreme Court. So you actually skip the appellate court level step in order to facilitate, I think, quicker. I'm putting air quotes around that because it's all relative, but you'll get decisions in a more timely fashion if you don't have that next level of review. But also for this, based on this idea of expertise, trying to isolate the judicial minds that are dealing with these issues. So you have these specialized water courts, and then the Supreme Court that does see a number of water issues over the course of a year and issue decisions on those.
So tell me what's coming up for TAG, and also can you tell us how our listeners can find out more about TAG do you have a Twitter account? Do you have a website you could give us so they can find out more about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we have a number of events through the year. Our business meetings that we host here in Austin, they're open to the public. You can register for those. The summit is a great way to get involved. Our website has, not something I did, but I think it's a great website. My predecessor and staff had done an amazing job building out a really great website, texasgroundwater.org. We do have a Twitter account. I have to admit that that's not something I've had a whole lot of time to focus on, so I'm not tweeting all that often on there, but we do have one. But yeah, I would encourage folks to just check out our website, check out the GCD Index, come to one of our events, or at least check out the YouTube channel and watch some of the presentations from this last year's summit or the ones in prior years.
Great. So let's wrap up with a water quote. Do you have one that you want to share with us?
Sure. So one that pops to mind, and I think about often, is something that it's a Benjamin Franklin quote, and it's that we'll know the worth of water when the well is dry. I might have that backwards. When the well is dry, we'll know the worth of water, and it's just so true, And it's hopefully we're all working to help people recognize that there is so much value there that we can't live without this resource before it's too late.
Well, it's looking kind of droughty across Texas now, so I bet there are a lot of people who are thinking about that very same thing, the value of their well water. So thank you so much for being part of this today, Leah. It was really great to talk to you. And let me just go ahead and wrap up by saying that this has been Talk+Water, the podcast associated with the Texas+Water newsletter, which provides timely information on the spectrum of Texas water issues, including science, policy, and law. Texas+Water is published jointly by the Meadows Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University, the Texas Water Journal, and the Texas Water Resources Institute at Texas A&M University. You can sign up for Texas+Water by visiting texas+water.org/newsletter. My name is Todd Votteler, the host of Talk+Water. Let's talk water again soon.